Last time we talked about understanding the market in order to scale the opportunity and create a value proposition. But you need to decide what characteristics and features are going to support that value proposition and what price point you're going to offer your product at in order to build a business case, which will be our next set of videos. So we're going to talk about the types of value and then later on about pricing. So it's easy to see different value types and value propositions when you go to the supermarket and look at the cereal aisle. So there's many different types there, from generics to trusted brands to lifestyle to volume. And when we talk about value, there's many different meanings, but the dictionary definition is the worth of something, and that's reflected in the demand combined with the price that the market is willing to pay. And that can be represented in the product management context as this simple formula, which is value equals benefit over price. So to increase value, we can lower the price, or we can increase the benefit, or do a bit of both. So if you remember back to the Understanding the Market video, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom, there were the deficiency needs, the ones that as humans, if we do without them, we have problems. And the ones at the top, the growth needs, where they bring additional benefit to us as humans. So those growth needs are what we would call emotional value or non-feature value, and the deficiency needs are what we would call functional value or feature value. Functional value you can recognize really clearly in advertising by something which is like 13% longer lasting, or now more compact, or fast charging, or 5-year warranty. These sorts of things. Anything with a number will be functional value. Functional value is easy. It's easy to engineer. The targets are usually quantifiable. They're numbers. That's easy for engineering to get their head around. They're easy to calculate from a business case point of view because it's an amount of something divided by a price being a value. They're easy to communicate, so just simply stating that amount. So 13% longer lasting is very easy to understand. And as long as you've got a reference point, it's easy for the customer to compare. So better than the one before, or better than such and such competitor by such and such an amount. So calculating those functional values, so you first of all decide all the items or features or metrics that you're going to put a value on, because you probably won't value everything. And then for those items, check the competitor option pricing. That's one easy way to do it. You can check competitor packages or grades and what features they have, and then work it out based on that. Or you can simply ask customers, how much would you pay for such and such a feature, or how much would you pay for this % more of something. If you remember back to when we talked about understanding your customers, there was the conjoint analysis, and that's a way of understanding this sort of subject. And then very simply, you can sum all of those feature values to find the total value of your product. So that's not without risk doing that. So let's say you want to build a value proposition based purely on functional value. So you take all the measurements of your competitors, you research and figure out how much value per feature you're going to have. You choose a couple of items or features where you're going to improve more than your competitors to have a unique value proposition. And then you sum all those up to give a value score, which is your price, and that's going to be better than any of your competitors. So you should sell thousands, right? It should be a no-brainer. But what if your customer needs or uses or wants one category more than others, and you didn't improve that one? So not all categories are equal necessarily. What if you increase the value in a category that the customer doesn't need or use, or much more than that customer needs? Not all your customers are going to be the same. We build personas or target customer profiles to represent the average customer, or the one we're trying to sell most to. But there's always fringe customers, and they might not be included with your proposal if you're just focusing on functional value in certain categories. If we think about refrigerators are a functional product, but the largest refrigerator ever isn't necessarily a great value proposition, because people have limited size kitchens and they only have certain items they want to put in a refrigerator. So just increasing the dimension isn't always the best. Additionally, features and functions, usually as you increase them, your costs become higher. So normally, to have a positive business case, you also need to increase your pricing. But remember that value is benefit over price. So if you're increasing your functionality and increasing your price, you're not necessarily increasing your value. And if your competitors lower their price or increase their functionality, what can you do? Really, you have to follow suit and do something similar. So with functional value, the key is really to have a minimum requirements met for the customer, and building what's called an MVP, a minimum viable product, and then adding value back above that minimum level in the areas that the customer prioritizes or your brand supports to create a unique value proposition. Now, instead, if you think about the best book you've ever read, or the best movie or TV show you've ever seen, maybe the best commercial or advertising, or even just product or service that you've had, just take a second and think about what that is. Bring something to your mind. Now, whatever you've chosen, I bet that isn't based on a fact or a figure or a pure function. It's probably not a washing machine. And that's because emotions are incredibly powerful. They reach us in ways that fact and data can't, and they stay with us in our memory in ways that facts and figures can't. So emotional value is something like sexy design, or keeping your family safe, being super exciting, or stopping annoying problems, or being the envy of your neighbors. But emotional value is really hard. It's really hard to engineer. Usually the targets are difficult to quantify. If I told you to make the best handling car, that would be really difficult for almost any engineer, because not only does handling make up a huge number of different areas of the car, but also what good handling is really subjective. It differs from person to person. It's really hard to calculate from a marketing and business case point of view. How do you put a price on attractive design? If your attractive design is a little bit more attractive, how much is that worth versus a lot more attractive? For the customer to understand your value proposition, experience is key. So it can be difficult to communicate. So particularly if you think about something like perfume commercials, they don't always make sense because what they're trying to communicate is an emotional value. So which is better? Well, think about it this way. Functional value is logical. Functional value, you have to consciously think to analyze and consider the proposition. This takes time because it's processed by the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the front part of your brain, which was the last part of our brains to evolve. And so those thoughts have to travel through your entire brain to make sense. That takes time, and it's not an immediate reaction. Whereas emotional value is an immediate reaction. Emotions come from a place called the amygdala, which is close to the spinal column, the brainstem. And it was one of the first parts of our brain to evolve. And that's because it's related to fight or flight, so emergency reaction. Back when we were on the savannah being hunted by lions and tigers, this was the part that kept us alive. And so what happens is that anything which you have to think about versus something which has an emotional reaction, the emotional reaction will always be quicker and more impactful than the logic. However, that doesn't mean you can just build a purely emotional product and be done with it. As I said, emotion value is really hard, but also functional value is necessary. So without functional value, you don't have a product which functions. So even the most recreational products or services have some element of functionality, that minimum viable product. So if you think about like the most amazing, beautiful, great to drive sports car, it still has to be a car that starts every day, that will hold people, that you can get into it, that has some distance that it can travel. So it needs some functionality. But emotional value is the hook. Emotional value is the attractor, like a magnet pulls the customer in. And it can be the reason that despite logic, someone chooses your product. So, I worked in the car industry for more than 20 years, and I was doing jobs which were quite analytical. I could analyze a car very rationally, but when I came to make my own purchase decisions, quite often they were heavily emotional purchase decisions. So, and that was despite knowing all that I know. So emotional value is incredibly powerful. So I would say, if you have the choice between investing in an emotional value and a functional value, probably emotional value makes more sense, but you can't disregard functional value. Functional value is incredibly important as a basis. So I remember in my first video on innovation techniques, I mentioned my personal approach to how to build up a proposition. That was a jigsaw of uniqueness, emotional value, and functional value. And really those three things have to work together to build any value proposition. You can't have just one of those things, or even just two of those things. And how that jigsaw will be built up will be based on your specific customer, competitors, market, and your brand, how those work together. So I hope that was useful. In the next video, we're going to be talking about pricing. Thanks.